July 26, 1944, just outside Saint-Lô, France. Staff Sergeant Frank Novak stood beside his mud-caked Sherman tank, staring into a dawn that felt more like an ending than a beginning. Somewhere beyond those hedgerows, a single German Tiger waited, a machine that could kill him from a mile away, while his own gun needed to get within 300 yards just to scratch its paint. 11 Allied tanks had already fallen to that Tiger in 2 days. Doctrine said to attack in formation. The manuals said trust the system. But Novak had built these tanks in Detroit. He knew their weaknesses, their quirks, and maybe their hidden potential. That night, by the flicker of a dying lantern, he did something the manuals never taught. He changed the math. He sketched a plan so insane, so impossible, it could either save his men or burn them all alive. Because sometimes the difference between death and survival isn't firepower, it's imagination. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Not just for history, but for the human stories behind it. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you think courage is just about pulling a trigger, this story might just change your mind. The morning of July 26, 1944, arrived like a held breath over the fields of Normandy. Low clouds hugged the ridges near Saint-Lô, and the air carried that strange quiet before violence begins again. Staff Sergeant Frank Novak stood beside his Sherman tank. Lucky strike, its olive hull streaked with mud and ash. The machine looked tired, as though even steel could feel the weight of exhaustion and fear. He ran a hand across the white stenciled letters, his reflection glinting in the dew on the armor plate. Somewhere beyond those hedgerows, a German Tiger waited. Patient, unseen, the king of the killing grounds. The Tiger could destroy a Sherman from a mile away. Novak's own 75mm gun had to close within 300 yards, 3 football fields, just to make a dent. It wasn't a fight, it was a math problem. At dawn, command briefed the crews. The numbers sounded almost clinical. 1 Tiger, 11 Allied tanks destroyed in 2 days, 55 men gone. The officers spoke quietly as though volume might change the outcome. Novak listened, not as a soldier, but as a builder. He'd helped assemble these machines back in Detroit, back when war was still blueprints and rivets. He'd believed in them. Once. Now he wasn't so sure. The Sherman, fast and reliable, was America's promise of quantity over quality. 5 for every one the Germans built. It sounded brilliant in a factory speech. Out here, surrounded by hedges and ghosts, it sounded like a lie. His loader, Jaime Walsh, moved inside the turret, humming an old church hymn. The sound felt fragile in the metal belly of the tank. A reminder that faith sometimes sounds like fear disguised as melody. Novak's driver, Rodriguez, tightened the bolts on the drive sprocket, pretending not to notice the tension building. The crew spoke little now. Words seemed dangerous, as though hope itself could draw fire. Captain Morrison's voice cracked through the field radio. "Gentlemen, intelligence confirms a Tiger near Hill 192. Its commander, Oberleutnant Karl Brandt. 47 confirmed kills since Tunisia. We'll advance in line formation. Doctrine stands." Doctrine. That word echoed in Novak's head like a curse. Doctrine didn't know the smell of burning oil or the sound of men screaming inside their tanks. Doctrine didn't understand geometry or desperation. He glanced at the map pinned to the hull. Their route cut straight through narrow lanes hemmed by thick hedgerows, perfect killing corridors. The Tiger didn't need to move. The Americans would bring themselves to it. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steadier, mixing with diesel and sweat. Novak folded Rose's letter and tucked it close to his heart. The paper was soft now from too much rereading. At 0700 hours, engines roared to life. 5 Shermans rolled forward in perfect formation, 50-yard intervals, columns neat and precise, exactly as the manual demanded. Beautiful on paper, suicidal in practice. The first shell hit before anyone saw the Tiger. A sharp crack split the air, and the lead tank vanished in flame. No warning, no time to react, just sudden, blinding destruction. Novak's throat went dry. "Reverse! Get us out!" But the second Sherman was already pushing forward, trained to follow the book, not instinct. Another flash, another explosion. Metal and men scattered into silence. Inside Lucky Strike, the air thickened with cordite and fear. Novak's crew froze, waiting for the next impact. Through the vision port, smoke and fire painted the hedgerows orange. The Tiger was invisible, but death rarely needed to be seen. Novak pressed his back to the cold turret wall, listening to the faint hiss of the radio. Somewhere out there, an enemy gunner was reloading, calm and methodical. And in that moment, Novak knew the truth. If they followed doctrine tomorrow, none of them would live to see another dawn. Long before Normandy's mud swallowed tanks whole, Frank Novak had known the smell of oil, steel, and cigarette smoke that clung to Detroit's assembly lines. War hadn't reached his doorstep yet. Only the orders had. He remembered the rhythmic thunder of hydraulic presses, the sparks from welders cutting through factory haze. It wasn't glamorous work, but to Novak, every rivet driven into a Sherman felt like a promise of strength. The plant was a city of movement. Women in coveralls, men with grease-stained hands, conveyor belts delivering the bones of machines that would soon cross oceans. "Build them fast," the foreman always said. "They'll do the rest." Frank used to believe that. He'd seen rows of finished Shermans rolling out like giants, painted green and perfect, their engines humming like heartbeats. But perfection in a warehouse wasn't the same as perfection under fire. In those days, the war felt mathematical. Production quotas, efficiency charts, steel tonnage per hour. Nobody mentioned the men who'd sit inside those numbers, praying they weren't on the wrong end of a Tiger's gun. He was good with numbers. Angles, armor thickness, impact trajectories. Simple geometry to him, a blueprint for survival to others. Back then, Novak thought math could save lives if only people listened. When the first reports from North Africa arrived, Shermans burning under the desert sun, outmatched by German panzers, workers paused on the line. For the first time, silence replaced the usual clang of industry. The foreman read the telegram aloud, voice steady but eyes hollow. "They're saying Tigers out there," he muttered. 88mm guns, thick as vault doors. A chill ran through the factory louder than any machine. Novak stayed late that night, running his hands along the cold hull of a newly built Sherman. "You'll do fine," he whispered, as if the steel could hear him, or needed to believe it could. When the draft notice came, he didn't hesitate. If these machines were going to war, he'd go with them. He'd helped give them life. Maybe he could keep them alive a little longer. Training felt mechanical compared to factory work. The Army treated men like parts, interchangeable, replaceable, expendable. Novak knew better. A tank was only as strong as the humans inside it. That, the manuals never said. He learned the Sherman's every sound, the grind of its transmission, the heartbeat rhythm of its radial engine. Each clank spoke to him like a language forged in Detroit and tested in blood. When he arrived in England in 1944, he touched the side of his assigned tank and smiled faintly. The weld seams looked familiar, like a craftsman recognizing his own signature on a piece of work. He taught his crew to treat their machine with respect. "This isn't just a tank," he told them. "It's a bridge between you and death. You treat it right, it might just hesitate before letting you die." His gunner, Jaime, didn't laugh. None of them did. By the time they landed in Normandy, laughter had been replaced by quiet superstition. Lucky coins, folded letters, crosses drawn in dirt before ignition. As the campaign dragged on, Frank began to see his Shermans differently. The welds that once meant durability now looked like scars. Each bolt, each plate, each sound of impact was a reminder of compromise. The Germans built masterpieces, over-engineered, precise, lethal. Americans built weapons of mass production, simple, plentiful, imperfect. But Novak understood what generals didn't. Wars aren't won by perfection, they're won by adaptation. And in the humid, fear-choked hedgerows of France, the lessons of Detroit would come back to him, not as nostalgia, but as instinct. Because when machines met monsters, only the builders remembered where the weak spots truly were. Oberleutnant Karl Brandt had seen too many sunrises through periscopes. Each one arrived silent and golden, washing over fields already littered with the husks of machines his Tiger had turned into burning monuments of war. His Tiger. I sat crouched beneath a veil of hedgerow and shadow, its 88mm gun pointing toward an invisible horizon. To Brandt, it wasn't a weapon. It was precision, carved from discipline and mathematics. Inside the steel giant, the air smelled of oil, sweat, and cordite. Every creak of the turret, every vibration of the Maybach engine beneath him was a familiar heartbeat, steady, controlled, mechanical perfection. He'd memorized every statistic: 100 millimeters of frontal armor, muzzle velocity near 3,000 feet per second, range over 2,000 yards. But those weren't numbers to Brandt. They were notes in a symphony of destruction. The crew trusted him completely. Schmidt, his eager loader barely 20, treated each shell like porcelain. Weber, the gunner, quiet and precise, could find the center of a coin at half a mile. They'd fought together in Africa, learned how the desert's emptiness magnified both strength and fear. Normandy was different. Claustrophobic hedgerows, soft soil, and unseen enemies whispering through fields thick with humidity and nerves. To the propaganda offices back in Berlin, the Tiger was invincible. To Brandt, it was only efficient. Invincibility was an illusion. One bullet through a fuel line, one miscalculated turn, and perfection burned like paper. Still, each engagement reinforced the legend. Allied tanks came in columns, predictable and obedient to doctrine. They advanced bravely, died quickly, and confirmed what every German engineer wanted to believe: that intellect outclassed industry. When his radio crackled with new orders that July morning, Brandt adjusted his binoculars and smiled faintly. American Shermans were approaching from the south. 5, perhaps 6. The hunt would begin again. He climbed from the hatch, scanning the horizon. The air shimmered above the wheat, and the distant rumble of engines drifted through the hedgerows. He could almost taste the anxiety moving closer. Back inside, he traced the gun elevation with gloved fingers. Range, 1,600 meters. Wait for clear silhouettes, he murmured. Weber nodded, adjusting optics with the calm precision of a man tuning a violin. Through Zeiss glass, Brandt saw the first Sherman appear. Olive drab, lumbering, unaware. The distance collapsed inside the lens until it looked fragile, human. He exhaled slowly. Target acquired. Fire. The recoil rocked the Tiger, deep and deliberate. A split second later, the Sherman erupted, flames climbing skyward like a flare announcing failure. Inside, Schmidt whispered, "Treffer." Hit. A word heavy with ritual. Brandt watched through the smoke. Another target rolled forward, faithful to formation. Another crack. Another explosion. He didn't cheer. Efficiency had no need for applause. War was arithmetic, and he was merely solving equations. Outside, the air trembled with secondary detonations. Fragments of armor hissed against the Tiger's hull like rain on a cathedral roof. The crew exchanged brief nods, professionals, not predators, completing another grim formula. Yet something unsettled him. The Americans kept coming, adjusting faster than before. They advanced, retreated, probed different lanes. They were learning. Brandt felt the shift, the unseen moment when the prey begins to think. He leaned against the optics, eyes narrowing at the smoke-covered horizon. "They're adapting," he said quietly. Good. Let them. Mathematics doesn't fear improvisation. It feeds on it. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the tiger purred, waiting for the next equation to solve. The rain had turned Normandy's roads into rivers of mud by the time Novak's column rolled out. The air smelled of wet earth and exhaust, the morning sky bruised gray above the hedgerows. 5 Shermans moved in perfect formation, engines rumbling like synchronized drums, 50 yards between each tank, just as the manual demanded. Doctrine made everything neat, even the path to destruction. Inside Lucky Strike, the crew worked in practiced rhythm. Rodriguez at the controls, Walsh humming nervously by the gun, Novak hunched over the radio, pretending the static meant control, not uncertainty. "Rawhide 2, hold position until contact," the command crackled. Novak acknowledged, his voice steady. But something in the air felt wrong, too quiet, too still, as if the land itself was waiting. A crow flew overhead, black wings slicing through mist. Then came the sound, sharp, unnatural metallic thunder. A single crack that didn't echo, it cut. The lead Sherman vanished in a blossom of fire. The explosion shook the hedgerows, leaves and mud raining down. The column halted instinctively, every man staring at the inferno that seconds ago had been Rawhide 1. Doctrine didn't mention what to do with burning friends. "Where is it?" Walsh shouted, scanning through the periscope. Novak saw nothing but smoke. No muzzle flash, no silhouette, no movement. Just a ghost firing death from beyond visibility. Another crack split the air. Rawhide 3 disintegrated. The Tiger's round punched through the turret, setting off ammunition inside. The tank lifted, twisted, then fell silent. A steel coffin in a smoking grave. Novak's breath came shallow. "Reverse! Back into cover!" he barked, and Rodriguez slammed the gears. Lucky Strike lurched backward into a sunken lane, treads slipping, engine growling against mud and fear. Through the narrow vision slit, Novak caught flashes of wreckage. Burning metal, twisted track links, men crawling from flames. He'd built these tanks to move, not to die like this. He grabbed the radio handset. "All units! Break formation! Flank left! Use the lanes!" Static answered. Then a final scream. "We can't see him!" Before another detonation swallowed the voice completely. Inside the Tiger, Oberleutnant Brandt adjusted his rangefinder. Through his optics, the American tanks looked distant, helpless. Calmly, he reloaded. Another shot, another perfect kill. Geometry and precision, his constant allies. Novak's hands trembled. The Sherman wasn't made for this kind of war. It was built for mobility, not duels. He felt anger rising, not at the enemy, but at the doctrine that demanded suicide. "Stay low," he ordered. Walsh nodded, reloading, jaw tight. Rodriguez muttered a prayer under his breath, the kind that begins as habit but ends as pleading. The Tiger hadn't moved. It didn't need to. The radio hissed again, Captain Morrison's voice faint beneath static. "All units, maintain line formation." Novak switched it off. He didn't need orders anymore. Orders had gotten 3 crews killed in 6 minutes. He unfolded his map, tracing the hedgerows, angles, distances, elevation lines. The Tiger's position had to be there, high ground, clear fields of fire. His mind shifted gears from panic to pattern recognition. Through the slit, flames flickered across the distance, reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere out there, a German engineer believed he was untouchable. Novak wasn't ready to prove him wrong yet, but he would. He sat back against the cold steel, listening to the fading echoes of the battle. 3 tanks gone, 2 left standing. And as the rain thickened, Frank Novak made a silent vow. Next time, he wouldn't follow doctrine. He'd rewrite it. That night, the rain never stopped. It fell in steady sheets across the camp near St. Lo, tapping on tent roofs like impatient fingers counting down to something inevitable. Sleep was a foreign concept now. Novak sat alone beneath the dim glow of a flashlight, a notebook spread across his knees. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was trying to solve. On the page, he drew the shape of a tiger tank, boxy, immovable, terrifying. Then 3 smaller shapes, Shermans, surrounding it. Angles, distances, speeds. He wasn't sketching a battle. He was drawing a theorem. Doctrine said to advance in line, but doctrine didn't know geometry. If 3 tanks attacked from different vectors, if timing was perfect, they could force the tiger to choose, and in choosing, lose. He did the math in silence. The tiger's turret took 30 seconds for a full powered rotation. The Sherman's top speed was 30 miles per hour. Time versus distance. It wasn't courage they needed. It was synchronization. Outside, the muffled sounds of wounded men drifted through the rain, coughing, murmuring, praying. Novak stared at his equations, each number representing a life that could be spared if his logic held true. In the tent beside his, Rodriguez snored softly, exhausted. Jaime Walsh whispered scripture, his voice trembling. Novak closed his eyes, seeing not the battlefield but the assembly line, pistons, gears, and motion perfected through repetition. That memory steadied him. The battlefield was just another production problem. Tanks moved like components. Timing mattered more than strength. The Germans relied on superiority. The Americans would rely on choreography. He drew the plan again, cleaner this time. 3 Shermans converging like closing jaws. 1 to distract, 2 to flank. Every movement counted. Every mistake would cost 5 lives. The math allowed no mercy. By 3 a.m., he stood, drenched in sweat and clarity. He grabbed his helmet and marched through the downpour to Captain Morrison's command tent, mud sucking at his boots like the earth itself wanted him to stop. Morrison looked up, eyes heavy with fatigue. "Sergeant, it's 3 in the morning," he groaned. Novak spread his sketches across the table. "Sir, I think I know how to kill that tiger." The captain studied the crude diagrams in silence. Lines, arrows, calculations scrawled in pencil. "That's not doctrine," he muttered. "You break formation, you lose coordination." Novak nodded. "Then maybe doctrine's what's killing us." Morrison hesitated. The weight of command was carved into the lines around his eyes. "You're asking me to gamble 9 men on math." Novak leaned forward. "No, sir. I'm asking you to gamble them on logic." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting canvas. Then Morrison exhaled slowly. "You get 1 chance, 3 tanks. Synchronize your madness. If it fails, it dies with you." Novak saluted sharply, his heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, fear felt useful, an energy he could direct. He stepped back into the storm, clutching the notebook like a survival manual. He found Rodriguez awake, cleaning his weapon by candlelight. Chen, the lieutenant, already alert, eyes sharp as if he'd been expecting Novak. "We're changing the playbook," Novak said. 3 tanks, 3 angles. We call it the Texas two-step." They studied the map together under flickering light. Timing, distance, radio coordination, all rehearsed until dawn, painted the camp in pale gray. None of them said it aloud, but they knew. Tomorrow, geometry would decide who lived. As Novak zipped his jacket and looked toward the mist-covered horizon, the doubt returned for just a heartbeat. Could simple math really outthink a machine designed for perfection? He didn't know. But faith, he realized, sometimes wore the face of calculation. Dawn came pale and metallic, a sky washed gray by mist and engine smoke. The men moved quietly, every motion deliberate, as if noise itself could draw the tiger's attention from miles away. Novak stood beside Lucky Strike, tightening his gloves with the precision of a man performing surgery. The crew's faces were unreadable, half faith, half resignation, each aware they were about to gamble with geometry. Rodriguez checked the treads one last time, mud packed deep between the links. "She'll hold," he muttered, though his eyes said otherwise. Machines always sounded braver before battle than the men inside them. At exactly 0555 hours, Novak keyed his radio. Rawhide 4, Rawhide 5. Confirm positions. Static crackled, then replies came crisp and steady. 3 tanks, 3 directions, one mad idea stitched together by timing and trust. The plan depended on choreography. Rodriguez would drive straight at the Tiger, laying smoke to blind those Zeiss optics. Novak and Chen would flank from opposite lanes, engines roaring, speed their only armor. Rain clung to every surface, turning leaves into mirrors. Through his periscope, Novak glimpsed gray light breaking through clouds. He exhaled slowly. "Remember," he said into the intercom, "we hit him where he isn't looking." The Shermans rumbled forward, treads crushing wet earth. Each turn of the engine was a heartbeat closer to either genius or death. The hedgerows closed around them like walls of green steel. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio. "Smoke out!" A burst of white phosphorus bloomed ahead, thick and ghostly. Visibility vanished. The world became fog, noise, and blind momentum. The hunt had begun. Inside the Tiger, Oberleutnant Brandt frowned. The fog wasn't weather. It was intention. "They're masking approach," he said calmly. "Traverse right." The turret groaned as it turned, the precision of engineering struggling against mud. Novak's Sherman burst through a gap in the hedge, flanking hard left. "Range 600!" Walsh shouted. The barrel aligned, heartbeats measured in seconds. Novak didn't blink. "Fire!" The cannon thundered, shaking heaven and soil. The shells struck the Tiger's side armor, sparks flaring, metal screaming. Not penetration, but pain. The beast was wounded, its calm shattered. Inside, German hands scrambled across controls, realizing the math had changed. From the opposite flank, Chen's gun spoke. His round smashed into the turret ring, sending shrapnel through the crew compartment. The Tiger's main gun froze mid-turn, a silent mechanical gasp of disbelief. Novak shouted for reload. Walsh slammed another shell home, sweat streaking his face. "Second shot! Same spot!" Fire again. This time, the impact tore open the engine deck. Smoke poured from the Tiger's vents. Brandt knew the battle was lost. "Abandon tank!" he ordered, voice steady but heavy. The crew spilled out, hands raised against the rising smoke, the myth of invincibility crumbling behind them. Novak kept his gun trained as Lucky Strike rolled closer, mud splattering the surrendering Germans. Through the haze, he saw Brandt, tall, composed, eyes filled not with hatred, but reluctant admiration. For a moment, silence reclaimed the field. 3 Shermans idled in a triangle around a burning Tiger, the geometry of survival complete. Doctrine had failed, improvisation had lived. Walsh whispered, "We did it." Novak didn't answer. He was staring at the smoldering wreck, realizing his formula had worked, but also that victory never sounded like triumph. It sounded like relief. As the smoke thinned, dawn finally broke across Normandy. The air stank of cordite and diesel, but somewhere within that chaos a new rule of war had been written, one born not from command, but from calculation. Flames poured from the Tiger's rear deck, thick black smoke curling into the pale Normandy sky. The smell of burning oil and scorched paint carried across the hedgerows like the ghost of victory. Inside Lucky Strike, no one spoke. The roar of the engine filled the silence left by adrenaline. Walsh still had his hands on the elevation wheel, knuckles white, as though afraid to breathe. Novak stared through his periscope, watching the German crew stumble from their crippled tank. 4 men, blackened with soot, coughing, eyes wide not with hate but disbelief. Their invincible machine was dying. Rodriguez exhaled a shaky laugh that ended almost as a sob. "She's burning, Sarge. We actually did it." Novak didn't answer. He couldn't yet believe the monster was truly finished. Outside, The Tiger's turret sagged to one side, molten metal dripping like candle wax. Every hiss of escaping steam felt like an exorcism, the battlefield breathing again after holding its breath too long. Novak climbed from the hatch, boots sinking into mud still trembling from the fight. The air was hot, thick with diesel and cordite. He walked toward the wreck as though approaching an altar. Brant stood beside his ruined machine, uniform torn, face streaked with ash. When their eyes met, the battlefield shrank to two men who understood the cost of perfection and the price of flaws. Neither raised a weapon. Brant gave a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement between builders whose creations had just destroyed each other's illusions. "Efficient," he murmured, his German accent soft. "Mathematics wins." Novak holstered his sidearm, still staring at the burning Tiger. "No," he said quietly. "Imagination wins." For a moment, the two soldiers shared a silence that belonged more to engineers than enemies. Around them, infantry units advanced cautiously, rifles aimed but unnecessary. The fight was over. The myth had cracked. The Tiger was no longer a symbol of terror. It was proof that even giants could fall. Chen's Sherman pulled up beside Lucky Strike, treads grinding wet soil. He leaned from the turret, face streaked with grime. "That's one for the history books, Frank." Novak nodded, still lost in thought. He looked at Brant again. The German officer seemed older now, shoulders sagging under exhaustion rather than defeat. In his eyes, Novak saw not arrogance, but a weary respect for logic. Medics moved among the wrecks, pulling survivors from twisted steel. Smoke mixed with morning mist, turning sunlight into amber haze. Somewhere behind them, artillery rumbled like distant thunder refusing to fade. Novak walked closer to Brant, lowering his weapon. "Your tank killed 11 of ours," he said evenly. "How many did this win you?" Brant's eyes flicked toward the burning hull. "None. We both lose." For the first time, Novak understood. War wasn't about winning equations, only surviving them. He offered water from his canteen. Brant accepted, drinking slowly, the gesture small yet revolutionary amid destruction. A radio call broke the moment. Captain Morrison's voice cracked with urgency. Another Tiger sighted 2 miles east, more Shermans down. Novak's chest tightened. The battle wasn't finished. The lesson wasn't over. He turned back to Brant. "You're coming with us." The German blinked, surprised. "You need me?" "No," Novak replied, fastening his helmet. "But my men do. You built these things. You'll help me break the next one." Brant hesitated, then nodded once. Behind them, the first Tiger collapsed inward as ammunition cooked off, the explosion shaking the ground beneath both soldiers. The fire roared higher, a monument to reason winning over doctrine. The road east from St. Lo shimmered under a veil of smoke and dawn light. Novak's Sherman rumbled forward, turrets scarred, engine coughing like an exhausted animal. Inside, 5 men rode with history beside them. Brant sat opposite Novak, wrists bound loosely, face lit by the dim glow of instrument gauges. His uniform smelled of burned oil and ash, his expression unreadable. A man caught between pride and defeat. Walsh kept his pistol steady on the German, though his hands trembled. "Sarge, this feels wrong," he muttered. Novak didn't answer. "Right and wrong died 3 miles back," he finally said. "Now we think." The radio crackled with fragmented voices, reports of another Tiger cutting through Allied armor near Grid Quebec 74. The same monster, different metal. Novak's jaw tightened. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. Outside, the fields blurred past, dotted with wrecks and bodies half swallowed by mud. Normandy had turned from farmland to factory floor, each explosion another hammer striking steel, forging something neither side could name yet. Brant leaned toward the map spread across Novak's knees. "If they follow your doctrine," he said evenly, They will die before closing 500 meters. Novak met his eyes. Then we won't follow doctrine. He slid a pencil along the paper, sketching hedgerows, elevation lines, and flanking routes. Brant watched silently, the builder in him awakening despite the shackles. You calculate angles well, he said. Detroit, Novak replied simply. The Sherman jolted over a crater. Rodriguez cursed under his breath, steadying the controls. We're low on fuel, he called. Brant nodded. So are they. Tigers drink more than they fight. That strange, shared humor broke the tension for a heartbeat. Men who'd tried to kill each other an hour ago now traded technical notes like colleagues at a symposium. Necessity had rewritten the rules. At 0700 hours, they reached the outskirts of the next engagement. Smoke hung thick over a valley of shattered trees. 2 Shermans burned on the ridge, Rawhide 6 and 7 reduced to silence. Novak raised his binoculars. Through the haze, he saw the glint of armor. Another Tiger, hull down, perfectly positioned, its gun sweeping the valley like a god's finger deciding who would live. He turned to Brant. If you were commanding it, where would you move next? The German traced a line on the map. Here, to cover his flank, but he'll take too long to turn. Novak keyed the radio. Rawhide 7, stand by for Texas 2-step. We're the distraction. The reply came shaky but determined. Even across fear, the men trusted the math more than the manual now. Brant's calm voice filled the intercom, offering ranges, wind compensation, angles of traverse. Cold data spoken like confession. Walsh glanced at him, realizing this wasn't betrayal. It was redemption through precision. Lucky Strike advanced through the fog, firing smoke to mask the Tiger's line of sight. Chen's Sherman flanked from the east, moving fast. The air hummed with tension, the rhythm of engines beating like war drums. The Tiger fired, missing wide through smoke. He's blinded, Brant said flatly. Now. Novak's hands clenched around the turret rail. Fire! The 75mm round hit clean, sparking against thinner armor, the second strike punching through the engine block. As flames rose again, Novak turned toward Brant. Their eyes met, engineer to engineer, soldier to soldier. There was no triumph, only recognition. In that burning valley, the line between enemy and ally blurred to ash. Infantry moved in to capture the surviving German crew. Brant stood beside Novak atop the Sherman, wind in his hair, expression solemn. Mathematics again, he murmured. Novak nodded. No, he said softly. Understanding. The smoke still hung low over the valley when a new engine note broke through the fading echoes of battle. It was sharper, faster, a sound unfamiliar to Novak's weary ears. From the eastern ridge, a British Sherman rolled into view, but its gun looked wrong, longer, sleeker, heavier. A white stenciled name stretched across its barrel, Firefly. Reinforcements had arrived with teeth. Lieutenant Powell of the British 7th Armored Division climbed from his hatch, grinning beneath a soot-streaked helmet. Quite the mess you've made here, Yanks, he called. Bloody brilliant work, though. 3 on 1, eh? Novak met him halfway, boots sinking into mud. Powell gestured toward the smoking Tiger wreck. You won't need to dance much longer, he said proudly. This girl can kill a Tiger head-on. He patted the 17-pounder barrel like it was a trusted hunting dog. Armor penetration at 1,000 yards. Straight through. 1 shot, 1 hole. Even Jerry's best can't hide from her. Brant watched silently, arms crossed, the faintest trace of professional respect flickering in his eyes. Efficient design, he murmured. Longer recoil, higher muzzle velocity. They finally solved the equation. Powell overheard, raising a brow. He's a Kraut? Novak nodded. Engineer, not enemy. He's helping us finish what he started. Powell blinked, then shrugged. War's strange, mate. I've seen stranger partnerships. The British crews clustered around the Firefly, admiring the weapon like pilgrims at a shrine. Sunlight caught the polished barrel, glinting through the haze like a promise that fear had an expiration date. Novak traced the lines of the new gun with his eyes. It was elegant, purposeful, a weapon that made his geometry obsolete. For the first time, he wasn't sure how to feel. Brant sensed it. "Your method will be forgotten," he said quietly. "Doctrine will take it. Call it strategy, and history will give it to someone else's name." Novak's reply was simple. "Good. Means it worked." They walked among the ruined tigers, inspecting angles of penetration, burned paint, the fine scars left by armor-piercing rounds. Two engineers on opposite sides, reading the same story written in steel. Powell crouched beside one wreck, whistling low. "You did this with 75s? Blimey. That's not tactics, that's witchcraft." Novak smiled faintly. "Just math and desperation. Sometimes they look the same." Back at camp, American and British officers argued over reports. Who'd killed what? Who'd devised which maneuver? Whose tanks should lead tomorrow's push? The usual bureaucracy of victory grinding louder than the guns ever had. Novak ignored it. He sat with Brant outside a field tent, sharing coffee that tasted like rust. "Your country builds beautifully," Novak said. "Ours just builds faster." Brant smiled. "Speed wins wars. Beauty loses them." The Firefly stood nearby, its barrel catching the last gold of afternoon. It looked like evolution made visible, the next step born from failure, forged by necessity, refined by the blood of both sides. British soldiers gathered for photographs beside it, cheerful, triumphant. For them, the Firefly was salvation. For Novak, it was closure. The tool he'd needed finally existed. The trick he'd invented was no longer necessary. As the sun sank behind the hedgerows, Brant turned to Novak. "So, your impossible idea becomes doctrine." Novak nodded slowly. "That's how progress works. One man's miracle becomes another's manual." The night settled, cool and quiet. The engines finally still. Across the field, the Firefly gleamed faintly under moonlight, a silent symbol of what came next, a future built not on fear, but on understanding. The war did not end with a single explosion or treaty. It faded slowly, like a machine winding down after years of strain. The fields of Normandy grew quiet again, scarred but alive. Frank Novak sat in his tent weeks later, the damp canvas walls fluttering with the evening breeze. The sound of distant engines no longer meant danger. It meant reconstruction, trucks carrying supplies instead of shells. He unfolded a letter from Rose, edges soft, ink smudged by handling. Her words were simple, tender, speaking of home and neighbors planting gardens again. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine peace. Across camp, engineers dismantled captured tigers, studying every bolt and bearing. Among them was Oberleutnant Karl Brandt, now a prisoner in name but a teacher in practice. He lectured Allied officers about design, efficiency, and the limits of perfection. Novak watched him one afternoon, the German gesturing over blueprints, eyes alight with familiar passion. In that moment, the labels of victor and captive seemed irrelevant. Both were simply builders, searching for meaning amid wreckage. Their conversations continued for days. They spoke of bridges, cranes, and factories, machines meant to create instead of destroy. Brandt said quietly, "The best designs serve life, not death." Novak couldn't have agreed more. When news came that Brandt would be transferred to England, Novak found him standing by the remains of a Sherman hull, running a hand along its battered edge like an old friend. "You were right," Novak said softly. "Math can win battles, but it can't fix people." Brandt looked up, expression distant. Then maybe we start building people instead of weapons. They shook hands, a brief, formal gesture, but heavy with understanding. No medals, no ceremony, just two engineers acknowledging the strange symmetry that had bound their fates together across enemy lines. Weeks later, Novak received a Red Cross parcel containing a single note in neat handwriting. Still teaching, still learning. Perhaps one day we build something better than armor. C. Brandt. He folded the paper carefully and placed it beside Rose's letters. War had taken so much from him. Friends, innocence, certainty. But it had given him one unshakable truth. Survival wasn't just endurance, it was evolution. By autumn, the Army adopted his Texas two-step maneuver into official doctrine. Manuals labeled it a flanking coordination tactic, stripped of its origin, its fear, its midnight calculations. Novak didn't mind. He'd built it for others to live. The Fireflies began rolling out in numbers. Stronger guns, better optics, faster responses. Somewhere he imagined Brandt studying one and smiling, recognizing traces of his own engineering in the machine that replaced his masterpiece. On quiet nights, Novak would walk past the motor pool, fingers trailing along cool armor plates. The clang of tools and laughter of mechanics replaced gunfire, a new rhythm for a world learning to breathe again. He wrote to Rose that winter, "Wars aren't won by the best machines, but by the best thinking. Sometimes even your enemy teaches you how to survive." He signed it simply, Frank. As snow fell softly over the camp, Novak gazed toward the horizon where the first light of dawn spread thin and golden. The world, battered and rebuilt, was still capable of beginning again. Somewhere in England, Brandt lectured about fluid dynamics and metallurgy, sketching bridges instead of turrets. Somewhere in Detroit, new engineers studied blueprints that once bore Novak's frantic midnight pencil marks. The cycle continued, but differently now. The last line in Novak's journal read, "We built weapons out of fear, then found humanity through calculation. Maybe that's what progress really means." He closed the book, smiled faintly, and stepped into the light of a quieter century.